Hi, and welcome to the inductive arguments. Same type of deal. We're basically going to look at examples of strong versus weak arguments that are both cogent and uncogent by looking to see that there are examples of arguments that are strong, that have false premises and a false conclusion, and yet there are weak arguments that have true premises and true conclusion. And so when we look at inductive, we're literally looking at the strength, or whether or not the conclusion follows from the premises offered. And so I want to start here also by saying that these examples that we're going to use are taken from a book that's a little bit older, and even though I typed it in, I was decided to go ahead and keep it, even though I think that there may be new evidence or new information that may make these arguments less probabilistic, at least this one. And so what happens is we can have a strong argument where if the premises are true, then it's strong and sound. And in lieu of any other evidence, such as in this one, like all American presidents were men. In the history of American presidents, all of them have been men. So probably the next American president will be a man. Well, that's a true premise. And if it's true that every president has had a certain attribute, then it's likely that that would be the same. Now, in this case, I would say that's both a strong argument and it has probably true conclusion. Doesn't mean it's necessarily true, but a probably true conclusion, and it does rely upon a true premise. Now, in this case, one of the things about inductive arguments is, for example, if Hillary Clinton were to end up running, or another strong female candidate were to end up running, then we would actually not be able to say that. But at least for this case, I think we can. And I think that's sort of the key on this, is that it is probably true that more likely than not, with some exceptions, the next American president will be a man, but it is not, it definitely in today's society is probably not 100% foredrawn. So we sort of say that to say, if those premises are true, it's likely true. It's not saying it is true. As a matter of fact, I could see definite arguments that it won't be true, but I could also see arguments the other way. Now, true premises to probably true conclusion that is weak. Example of this, a few American presidents were Federalists. Therefore, the next American president will probably be a man. Well, a few American presidents did belong to the political party Federalist, and probably the next president will be a man. We already discussed that and said, yeah, probably, but we can't. I mean, it's probably greater than 50%, so we'll say it's probable. But what happens here is that premise has nothing to do with that conclusion. So it doesn't inferentially link that idea. And so we would say that it's weak because it doesn't really follow from it. And so we can say it's both weak, and we would then call it uncogent simply because it is weak. Now, another example might be a few American presidents were Federalists. Probably the next American president will be a Federalist. Well, here we are once again. We have the same premise, but the other conclusion, which actually follows from it, is actually somewhat related to the first one. Probably the next American president will be a Federalist, is actually linked, but a few American presidents being Federalists, belonging to a political party that's been gone for 200 years, is probably not a sufficient thing to say that the next president will probably be a Federalist. As a matter of fact, it would probably be less probable than a lot of things. I don't even think the party exists anymore to begin with, but even if it did, a few is not enough. A few presidents have been bald, perhaps. I don't know if that's true or not. I think a few of them have had a lack of hair. I don't know if I'd say bald, but I think there have been a couple probably fall into that category. Therefore, the next president will probably be bald. That doesn't really follow, now does it? I mean, just because a few have doesn't make it. So it's pretty weak in its conclusion, and so it's weak and both uncogent. Now, if you have true premises and a probably false conclusion with a strong argument, no. Why? Because if it's true and it's strong, then the conclusion must probably be true. Otherwise, it's not a strong argument. So, now we get into this idea of, can you have false premises with a probably true conclusion? Absolutely. And it can be strong. Like, for example, all previous American presidents debated on TV. That is not a true premise, but it is true that probably the next American president will debate on TV. Now, what happens here is sort of the key on this is that if this were true, that all previous American presidents debate on TV, then it would be strong to say that the next president would probably debate on TV. So even though this isn't true, if it were true, it would very well support this. And that's where we get the label strong. So, but we would then call it uncogent because it's not true, even though the conclusion is. Because the premise is false, we would label it uncogent. So the key here is does this premise give strong reason to believe the conclusion? The answer is yes, making it strong, but because the premise is false, we label it uncogent. Now, if we have an example of one that has both false premises and a probably false conclusion, like all American presidents were women, therefore probably the next American president will be a woman. In this case, the premise and the conclusion are both false, or at least, as we discussed, that the next American president will probably not be a female. Although, like I said, I don't know that it's pretty close to 50-50. But the case here is that all American presidents were women is false, and probably the next American president will be a woman is not probable that the next president will, although I think it may be 40% chance. And so what we have is a strong argument, but it's uncogent because it uses false information. Now, we can have false premises with a probably true conclusion that's weak, like a few American presidents were libertarians. There's never been a libertarian president. Therefore, probably the next American president will debate on TV. This one is once again one where the conclusion has nothing to do with the premises, and so it's not only weak, but it's also uncogent. And the other one, a few American presidents were libertarians, therefore probably the next will be a libertarian. Everything is false, but it also isn't very strong. And so it's both weak and uncogent. So once again, the key here is to pay attention to the fact that even though the premises may be true, that does not make the argument strong. Even if the premises are true and the conclusion is true, does not make it strong. It's really about sort of judging, and some of this has to be done intuitively, of saying, does that follow from this? Hello, I begin this lesson, basically, I'm going to begin by saying that I've tried to record this video several times, and I'm really hopeful that it works this time, because if it doesn't, I might just have no choice but to attack my computer, take it outside, run over it once or twice. No, I probably wouldn't do that, but but the case is that I have tried recording this several times. I'm hoping this works. Basically what I'm going to look at is deductive arguments, and what we're going to look at is you can weigh out the inferential claim if it's valid or invalid, and then you can decide if it's sound or unsound. But the key here is that determining if something is valid or invalid is not make any difference if the premises are true or not. Really, the only thing that matters is whether or not the information follows from the premises. And so then sound versus unsound is really a label we give to things that are true versus not true. So in the end, I'm going to give you several examples. And what we're going to do is we're going to say, is it possible, you have true premises and a true conclusion that's both valid and sound. Okay, so valid means that the follows. So an example of this would be all wines are beverages. Okay, that's true. Chardonnay is a wine. That's correct. Therefore, Chardonnay is a beverage. As a matter of fact, that follows. Why? Because if something is a wine, then it's also a beverage, according to this. So, if Chardonnay is a wine, then it's a beverage, therefore Chardonnay is a beverage. The premises are all true, the conclusion is true, and it's a valid form, it follows. But what we can find is you can actually have true premises and a true conclusion, but it's not inferentially valid, it's invalid. An example of this would be saying like, all wines are beverages, that's true. Chardonnay is a beverage, that's true. Therefore, Chardonnay is a wine, and that's true as well. Now, what happens here is that what we have a problem in that this doesn't actually follow. If Chardonnay is a beverage, right, then it doesn't make sense that it has to be a wine, because all wines are beverages, but there can be beverages that are not wines. As a matter of fact, a beverage could be, a soda, or a soft drink, or a beer, or a liquor. And so the case is that, just because Chardonnay is a beverage does not mean that that the beverage has to be a wine. If it's a wine, it has to be a beverage, but it doesn't have to work the other way around. And so basically what happens is Chardonnay being a beverage does not make it necessarily a wine. It's possible, but it's not necessary. We could do this by switching the word here of Chardonnay to something like ginger ale. If all wines are beverages and ginger ale is a beverage, does ginger ale become a wine? No, we all know ginger ale is not a wine. That would be true premises because ginger ale is a beverage and all wines are beverages, but we see that it doesn't follow out. It doesn't make that last line that ginger ale is a wine. I have that written here, but I forgot to change the word beverage to wine, and so I am just sort of working with that, so that's the example there. So it would be invalid because it doesn't follow. Now, could you have true premises, a false conclusion, and a valid argument? And the answer is no, you could not. Why? Because in order for something to be valid, the premises, if true, would necessarily mean the conclusion is true. And so if the premises are true, it's valid, the conclusion must be true. You can never have a false conclusion. Now what we can do is we can say, well, is it possible to have false premises and a true conclusion and a valid argument? And the answer is yes. The falsity of the premises does not make the argument invalid. As a matter of fact, you can have false premises and still have a valid argument form. An example is something like all wines are soft drinks. Okay, that's not true. Wines are not soft drinks. They're hard drinks or liquors or alcoholic, and soft drinks are non-alcoholic. Ginger ale is a wine. Also false. But ginger ale is a soft drink. Well, that's true. Now, if we look at this and we say ginger ale is a wine, and if it's a wine, then it's a soft drink, then it would follow that ginger ale is a soft drink. And so it is a valid form because this actually does follow from these premises. But we would also say it's unsound. And the reason we say it's unsound is because even though it follows from those premises, it is not the case that it is, even though it follows from those premises, it is not the case that that those premises are true. So what we have to do sort of when we look at validity is we have to assume everything's true and we say, would that follow? And don't look at the fact that you already know something's false or you already know something's true and try to use it. Just sort of forget it. A lot of times it's easiest just to sort of throw in other words like all gobbledygooks are gobbledy-looks and blank is a gobbledygook or what, I mean, whatever you want to make up words. I mean, I think maybe words a little simpler than what I just used are better. But if you do that, you can actually see, well, if all widgets are happy and Stan is a widget, then Stan is happy, and that follows, even though there's no way of knowing the veracity of those lines. Same thing can happen. You can have false premises, false conclusion, and still have a valid argument. Example of this is saying like all wines are whiskeys. That's false. Ginger ale is a wine. That's false. And ginger ale is a whiskey. Well, that actually follows, because if ginger ale is a wine and all wines are whiskeys, then ginger ale would be a whiskey. And even though it follows, it inferentially follows, it's valid, it is unsound because everything is false. And so you have to keep in mind that validity is about the inferential claim, and sound and unsound is about the truth or falsity. Now, we can also have false premises to a true conclusion that's invalid. Example is all wines are whiskeys, Chardonnay is a whiskey, therefore Chardonnay is a wine. In this case, your premises are false and your conclusion is true. Saying like all wines are whiskeys is not true and Chardonnay is a whiskey is not true. And furthermore, if Chardonnay is a whiskey, that doesn't make it a wine. So that makes it both invalid and unsound. And we can also change that to ginger ale like we did previously, and we again get that same format. All right, thank you.